With Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 265, we see the story take its foot off the gas after what has been dozens upon dozens of pretty much non-stop action filled with fights for each chapter, and this part of the story is essentially Gege doing maintenance to the lore itself, the way that you would do an oil change or you would rotate the tires on your car once you've hit a certain amount of mileage. That's what we're doing here with this long chapter that is packed with a lot of dialogue, and the reason why everything that we're seeing here is so important is that it goes back to that controversial moment where Gojo woke up in the afterlife, and one of his regrets was that his fists were not able to reach Sukuna and teach him what love truly was. Gojo said that Sukuna would have to be reached by another person, and what we're seeing here is that Itadori is attempting to reach Sukuna before he's forced to fight him. He's seeking an end to the conflict before it escalates even further, a sign of maturation of the character, and after having experienced so much loss and so much growth of the character in terms of his goal that we had at the start of the series when it comes to giving people a proper death. As we go over this chapter, I want you to keep this information in mind. Sukuna says that he knows what love is, but Yuji is trying to teach him that knowing what love is, that's not the same as having experienced love, having loved someone yourself, and having been on the receiving end of love. Yuji, due to having all those boxes checked, is attempting to uncover more about who Sukuna is, because anyone who's felt love before, been in love, they would never reject love when it's being offered to them. Is Sukuna someone hiding from pain from a past experience, or is he a psychopath who is beyond being reached and is able to detach the very feelings and emotions that make us human? Hence the Buddha statue that we have in the start of the chapter itself. Yuji is trying to get the answer to those questions before we get the final battle of Yuji versus Sukuna. So we open up the chapter with Yuji and Sukuna moving out of the train station, and they're in deep conversation as they're going through this insane domain expansion of Itadori's, and Sukuna spells it out for us as the audience that this is what happens in combat in rare instances where you connect with your enemy, and it's because of cursed energy being rooted in human emotions. And what we're seeing here is that Sukuna, truly for the first time in the series, is having to acknowledge Yuji's strength. He's killed thousands of people before during this time, yet he's only ever been connected with people in the realm like this when he's considered them to be strong and respected their strength the few times we've seen this happen with Sukuna, which I thought that was a nice payoff for Yuji and Sukuna. If you go back to when they first met, Sukuna was very dismissive of him, whereas right now he is forced to admit things are different now, outright asking if this is Yuji's domain expansion, and Yuji continues that trope of it's the idiot main character who's secretly a genius by saying he doesn't truly understand everything that's going on either, but for right now he just wants to be able to speak to Sukuna. That Buddhism statue of the demon lord dance, it isn't something that was there by mistake either. For a series like Jujutsu Kaisen that mixes in so much symbolism in a very, very clever way, at times reversing the very meanings of the symbols being used in order to better benefit the story itself. So that Buddha statue being shown here right before Yuji eventually tells Sukuna about the purpose of life is to show Yuji's enlightenment, that he's transcending in the way that the Buddha did by letting go of the cog mentality and the shackles that constrict normal humans that are caught in a cycle. He's enlightened. He knows he has a role and a choice in this world now, and is clashing with his nature to a degree, which we'll get to see as we move deeper into the chapter itself. We then see Yuji attempting to reach Sukuna by walking through the various parts of his life up to the moment where he became a vessel for Sukuna by sharing a lot of things that are rooted in death, like the funeral that he went to as a kid and wondering if his grandpa died before the person whose funeral they went to, would that person have shown up at all? We see Yuji talk about his near-death experience when he was playing in the park. Both times he tries to connect with Sukuna early on. He's mentioning death itself to someone who is basically an agent of death in the form of Sukuna, who is responsible for more deaths than we could ever hope to begin counting and get a number for. It's paying off the conversation that Yuji had with the Jujutsu High Principal in volume 1 of the story, where the principal is asking him, why does he want to be a Jujutsu sorcerer? And does he truly understand that being a Jujutsu sorcerer means dying early, dying before you can achieve your goals in a lot of cases like Nobara, and sadly dying alone like we saw with Nanami and Gojo. The reason why Yuji was able to say so quickly yes is that we're getting the answer now being told to us in this conversation with Sukuna, where even from a young age, Itadori story has been associated with death itself. What's interesting here is that the conversations are moving forward. We learn that Sukuna can go through the memories of everyone who he shared bodies with, something we knew before. However, what we learn is that he doesn't read through all of their memories themselves. There's a certain line that he will not cross for an undisclosed reason. Based on Yuji and Gojo's words, one might say it's in order to come into too close of contact with the strong emotions of love that people have via their memories. But this is where it gets very fun here. So instead of pushing any further, Yuji gets Sukuna to start fishing with him. He even teases him, which that's crazy to think just based on all of the history between these two. And for a moment, it does make you stop and realize that these two, they do share a close bond because of who Sukuna's twin is, and most importantly, who Yuji's mother is, because Kenjaku was controlling her body during the time where Yuji was given birth to. We briefly get to see that behind that stubborn side of Sukuna, there might have been something else there, hidden behind all that anger and hostility that was never allowed to come out. And even though he's being as nasty as ever, there's just enough there to make you stop and pause for a moment. The imagery, it continues with Yuji talking about the closed down department store and how the death of one purpose led to the birth of another purpose. With the department store now being a movie theater, it's continuing with the imagery and the symbolism of death in a subtle way before we move on to the moment where Yuji and Sukuna, they begin to hit their breaking points later on. And it's meant to start transitioning us over to what is supposed to be greener pastures, but ends up being the grounds for the two of them to have their conflict. But for right now, Gege is just continuing to add layer of symbolism onto the story. It's small breadcrumbs meant to allow us to put the pieces together without spoon feeding the answer to us in the way that a lesser series might do, namely a lot of gateway shonen series. With Jujutsu Kaisen, it's more so going the route of Bleach. You're gonna have to reread it a few times in order to pick up on all the intricate nuances that the story is hiding for you in plain sight. Gege lays it on very thick as they move deeper into the domain, where Yuji notices how less full of life this area is, which used to be so brimful with grasshoppers that he used to catch as a kid. And he's wondering, maybe it's the pesticide, but all this empty space in these greener pastures is basically something that is showing that as time passes, there's more death that is coming, just as how the things in Yuji's own life, since he became a Jujutsu sorcerer, they have changed over time. We move on to Yuji and Sukuna, and they're shooting arrows at targets before Yuji starts to share more about his childhood before Sukuna finally says, enough with these trips down memory lane. This in return leads to Yuji getting straight to the point, showing us his enlightenment by reflecting on those who he's come into contact with in his life, who have changed his worldview and made him truly understand what it means to have a fulfilled role in life before getting a proper death, from his grandpa to Nanami to Nobara to Maito to Gojo. And it causes him to realize that it's the memories and the experiences that are the true measure of human life. He's trying to talk to Sukuna to make him see all of this by showing the values of memories and bonds in human life before he comes to the option that he has to kill him. Yuji is showing that he's willing to give Sukuna one final chance to give himself up before Yuji ultimately ends him, which is why he's so confident in his ability to kill him. We see the empathy come out of Yuji, we see the forgiving side come out, we see the fair side of Yuji come out. They're on full display here, even in the face of a heartless villain who is asking him if he's doing all of this because he pities him. Yuji, once he sees that there's no going back, that Sukuna might be too far beyond his reach, makes one final push, saying that they can avoid this battle to the death if Sukuna lets go of Fushiguro and returns to Yuji's body. But if he insists on fighting, Yuji will make him suffer if he doesn't, which leads to Sukuna responding in a way that we've mostly come to expect from Sukuna's character, which is to meet violence and aggression or more violence and aggression. He says he's going to cut up all of Yuji's remaining loved ones when all of this is over, and he's going to make them suffer. What we're also seeing here is that Yuji, in a way, is this pure-hearted fallen angel whose wings and white cloak, they've been sullied in the blood of this Jujutsu world that he's fallen into. He's had his pure ideals, but ultimately is having to fight the very monster in Sukuna that condemned him the moment he swallowed his finger. And he's trying to avoid the battle, and it's a sign that that same part of Yuji, that pure innocent side, he wants to avoid a murder where he can, because that side of him still exists. Whereas with Sukuna, he is the one who, between the two of them, has been enlightened for the longest, in the sense that he is positioning himself as someone who has already accepted what he is at his core, a cold-hearted murderer. He holds onto the ways of the old, and he rejected the very love that Yuji and Gojo were trying to force him to see and ultimately understand, which is why it is the perfect transition to the battle that will be coming in the next chapter we get. We needed to see this chapter, for as slow as it was, because it represents a calm before the storm and a sign of how everything that has happened up until this point, from the death of a minor character like Junpei, who forced Yuji to understand that even misguided good people, they can die in this world, to deaths like Nobar, who died with regrets and unfinished goals, which shows that life isn't fair. Which, speaking of Nobar's death in this chapter finally being confirmed, it's even more heartbreaking when you go back to what she says in season 1 of the anime about how there's only so many seats open in her life, and only letting those who are sitting in those seats be able to sway her heart. And right before she dies, we see her picturing Yuji and Gojo and her classmates at Jujutsu High inside of those empty seats, and then we see her regrets in not linking back up with her childhood friend. Even the deaths of people like Mahito, they show Yuji that there are those who just want to see the world burn and can never be reasoned with, to deaths like people like Gojo and Choso, who die in order to serve as a bridge to those who they love and that they left behind. All of that suffering is setting the stage for the next battle to make it more of a slugfest, which I truly appreciate this decision with this approach. Not everything needs to be big explosions go bam and domain expansion goes swoosh.